Right as the doctor declared I only had 3 days to live, my own mom smiled, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, "Finally, just 3 more days and everything will be mine." Following her, my biological sister's voice chimed in from the hallway, dripping with greed. "I'll take her Corvette." The iron heart of a Navy commander shattered in an instant. I lay paralyzed on the bed, my eyes squeezed shut in feigned delirium, letting the very people who shared my blood gleefully count down to my death. The moment their heels clicked out the door, I bolted upright and secretly made the single most important call to my loyal estate manager. "Help me, and you will never have to work another day in your life." On the other end of the line, the 60-year-old man's voice trembled in panic before he uttered a shocking medical truth, one that would trigger the most ruthless vengeance this family had ever witnessed. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Don't go anywhere, because the roots of this betrayal didn't start in that hospital room. They were planted decades ago. I gripped the thin, bleach-scented hospital blanket so hard my knuckles turned a stark white against my bruised skin. My sister's greedy claim over the Corvette was not just a grab for a piece of metal. It was a rusty knife plunged straight into my most sacred memory. The sterile, suffocating smell of the IV drip faded from my senses, instantly replaced by the phantom scent of heavy motor oil exhaust and worn leather. I was violently dragged back to the endless weekends spent with my dad, General Arthur Fraser. We had bought that beautiful dark blue 1972 Corvette with a small block engine when it was nothing but a dilapidated, rusted shell sitting in a scrapyard. Nobody else saw potential in that heap of corroded steel, but my dad pointed at it and told me that a soldier sees value where others see wreckage. We spent years locked inside his garage, our hands stained with grease, reviving the machine piece by piece. We rebuilt the carburetor, replaced the suspension bushings, sanded the body panels down to bare metal. Every turned wrench and busted knuckle was a lesson in resilience. That car was the physical embodiment of our bond, built on sweat and unyielding dedication. My dad was a man of absolute iron discipline, and those grueling hours under the hood were his covert way of teaching me honor, loyalty, and the true cost of sacrifice. He was the only person who saw entirely through my mom and sister's perfect high society facade. He watched my mom drain their joint accounts on country club memberships and cosmetic procedures. He watched my sister coast through private schools without cracking a single textbook, then drop out of college within 2 semesters. He knew they measured love in dollar signs. That was exactly why, upon his passing, he bypassed them entirely, legally locking the vast Fraser Holdings fund under my absolute command. He trusted a soldier to guard the fortress, but my mom and sister deeply despised that car. To my lazy sister, it was just an expensive asset to liquidate for shopping money. To my materialistic mom, it was a constant, glaring reminder that she could never fully control my dad or his wealth. They hated everything it stood for. My bitter flashback was abruptly shattered by the sound of the hospital door cracking open just a fraction of an inch. My mom had not left the ward. She was standing right in the hallway, whispering furiously to my sister. Her hissing voice slithered through the crack like a serpent. "I'm serious about that Corvette." My sister grumbled something in a tone of supreme entitled annoyance before my mom cut her off. Her voice was dripping with venomous, cold-blooded calculation. "You can have the house. The house and that whole damn fund will no longer be controlled by that brat. It will be ours soon. And her military death benefits too." They were not mourning my diagnosis. They were actively auditing my corpse before my heart even stopped beating. I memorized every syllable. Each word burned into my memory with the precision of a targeting computer locking onto a threat. I stared down at my IV-bruised right hand. Just minutes ago, my mom's manicured fingers had been tightly woven through mine in a flawless, Oscar-worthy display of fake maternal grief for the attending nurses. She had dabbed her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief and whispered sweet prayers loud enough for the hallway to hear. I had spent years using my military salary and my dad's trust fund to finance their lavish lifestyle, stupidly playing the dutiful daughter in hopes of earning their genuine love. I paid for my sister's apartment, her car insurance, her credit card bills. I bankrolled my mom's annual trips to European spas and her membership at the most exclusive golf club in the state. All of it purchased with the desperate, idiotic hope that money could buy me a seat at their table. At that exact second, the daughter they mercilessly exploited died permanently. The Navy commander awoke in her place. I wiped a single silent tear from my cheek. I reached over, adjusted my IV line to ensure optimal fluid flow, and leveled my breathing into a slow, rhythmic cadence. It was time to map out the battlefield and launch a ruthless counter-offensive. That evening, the suffocating silence of my hospital room was broken by a heavy, deliberate footstep squeaking against the linoleum. The sturdy, imposing silhouette of Mateo Vargas appeared in the doorway, wearing his faded canvas work jacket, the same one he had worn every winter for the past 15 years, while tending my dad's rose gardens. He was our head gardener, a 60-year-old loyalist who had served my dad for decades. He had carried my dad's casket. He had stood in the rain at the burial when my mom had refused to stay past the first prayer. He carefully scanned the hallway with the eyes of a veteran before slipping inside and locking the door behind him. The ambient light caught the deep wrinkles on his weathered face, the same face that used to slip me leftover empanadas when my mom sent me to bed without dinner as a punishment for getting grease on her white sofa. His thick, calloused hands clenched into tight fists as he looked down at my failing monitors. He spoke in a low, furious growl, barely containing his disgust. "She and her daughter think you're already dead, Miss Lexi." I dropped my rigid commander mask, allowing the physical exhaustion to show. For the first time in years, my voice cracked, stripped of all military authority. "I may have been dead to them for a long time, Mateo. Help me, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. You will have everything." Mateo stepped closer to the edge of the bed, locking his dark eyes directly with mine. There was absolutely no pity in his gaze, only the unyielding protective steel of an old soldier who remembered the little girl he used to push on the garden swing. "I'm helping because you're the general's daughter, and because you're the only family I recognize in that house. We are not discussing money right now." He straightened his back and set his jaw. The deal was sealed not with cash, but with decades of loyalty that blood had failed to earn. He crossed his muscular arms, demanding a full, unredacted tactical briefing on exactly what the civilian doctor had told me. A suspicious tumor. Acute pancreatitis. 3 days to live. I repeated numbly, the devastating words tasting like ash in my dry mouth. Mateo furiously shook his head, refusing to accept the civilian doctor's defeatist diagnosis. His face flushed red, the veins in his thick neck bulging. He jabbed a calloused finger toward the window as if the incompetent doctor was standing right there. "I saw a brother in arms with the exact same symptoms. You cannot surrender without a military medical diagnosis." His absolute refusal to let me die sparked a dormant fire deep in my chest. He was not looking at a dying woman. He was looking at an officer who needed to be extracted from enemy territory. Without hesitating another second, Mateo reached into his jacket and pulled out his encrypted smartphone. Using my dad's old emergency access protocols, the ones the general had drilled into both of us during his final years, in case anything ever happened to the family, he bypassed the standard civilian hospital switchboards and directly dialed Dr. Olivia Mercer, a senior military medic stationed at Walter Reed. My survival instinct reignited, burning away the despair. I propped myself up against the pillows, reached out and detached my heart rate monitor slightly so the nursing station would not register my accelerating pulse. I stared at the locked door, fully awake, actively mapping out my defensive perimeter in the dark as I waited for the doctor to answer. 2 enemies in the hallway, 1 ally at my bedside, and a phone call that could decide whether I would live or die on my mom's terms. The following morning, the air in the hospital room was thick with unstated tension. I had spent the entire night running tactical scenarios in my head, cataloging every move my mom had made in the past 48 hours. I counted 3 separate visits to the hospital's patient care coordinator, each one pushing harder for a comfort-only treatment plan. I overheard a nurse mention that my mom had already requested brochures for hospice facilities. She was laying the groundwork to have me reclassified as terminal and transferred out of active care, which would strip me of any aggressive treatment options and effectively hand her the keys to my estate, while I wasted away on morphine. I knew my mom was already legally maneuvering to accelerate my transition to palliative care, a sanitized medical term for starving me to death to expedite her inheritance. I had to strike first. I hit the nurse call button with aggressive, deliberate force. When head nurse Sarah entered with her clipboard, I sat up straight, ignoring the searing pain in my abdomen. I delivered a razor-sharp command. Bring me the medical power of attorney. I am fully conscious and I will personally sign to assume absolute decision-making authority over all my medical procedures, completely revoking Evelyn Fraser's status. The nurse blinked in shock at my sudden terrifying lucidity, but her training kicked in, and she rushed out to get the forms. Right on cue, the heavy wooden door swung open. My mom glided into the room with a perfectly staged, sorrowful smile, clutching a ridiculously expensive fruit basket solely for the benefit of the audience in the hallway. A cluster of sympathetic nurses watched from the corridor, whispering about what a devoted mother she was. My sister trailed closely behind her, scanning the expensive medical equipment, like she was appraising scrap metal for a quick sale. Her eyes lingered on the cardiac monitor, the IV pump, and the adjustable bed frame, probably estimating their resale value. The moment my mom's eyes locked onto the thick, legal POA form resting on my tray table, her saintly grieving mask cracked right down the middle. Panic flared wildly in her eyes. The fruit basket trembled in her grip. She lunged toward the bed, her voice shrill and desperate as she tried to snatch the clipboard from my grasp. "Lexi, what are you doing? You are not in your right mind. I am your guardian. This is our family's business." When she realized I had an iron, unyielding grip on the paperwork, she spun around and glared at Mateo, who was standing guard in the corner of the room like a stone sentinel. His arms were folded across his broad chest, his dark eyes locked on her every move. She hissed venomously, dropping all pretense of maternal grace. "What have you brainwashed her with, you freelancing old fool? You better get out of here before I throw you out of the estate." Her designer mask slipped completely in that instant, revealing the vicious, calculating predator she had always been behind closed doors. I violently slapped her manicured hand away from my legal documents. With a dead-eyed stare that I usually reserved for insubordinate recruits, I dropped my voice to a lethal, vibrating calm. "The one who needs to stay silent here is you. I am the commander of my life, and Mateo is my man. Any threat directed at him is considered a direct hostile act against me. This medical decision is an order, not a negotiation." I clicked my ballpoint pen and slashed my signature aggressively across the dotted line, pressing so hard the ink bled through to the second page. My mom and sister stumbled backward, physically trembling before an authority they could not manipulate, could not gaslight, and could not buy. The fruit basket hit the floor. Neither of them picked it up. 2 days later, my mom returned to the hospital, fully reprising her award-winning role as the exhausted, devoted parent for the medical staff. She had dark circles under her eyes that she had carefully applied with makeup to sell the performance. The second the doctors left us alone, her demeanor instantly shifted to cold, calculated business. She reached into her designer tote bag, pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents, and slid them onto my tray table with the casual precision of a loan shark delivering a contract. "Lexi, darling, these are just standard paperwork, temporary control of Fraser Holdings, and a will adjustment so I can handle things if you get too weak." She was trying to strip my final financial weapons away before my heart monitor flatlined. She had already consulted her own estate attorney. She was ready to move the second I signed. I stared coldly at the papers, fully aware this was her blatant attempt to legally loot my life's work and my dad's legacy. I recognized the name of her private attorney printed in the letterhead, a man known locally for helping wealthy widows break ironclad trusts. I let out a sharp, condescending scoff, lifted my bruised arm, and shoved the entire stack violently off the bed. The heavy papers slammed against the linoleum floor, scattering everywhere like a deck of cards thrown in disgust. "I am not signing anything. Get this garbage out of my sight." My mom turned a sickly shade of pale, her jaw tightening in suppressed murderous rage. Unwilling to cause a scene in front of the nurses who could hear everything through the thin walls, she furiously gathered her mess from the floor on her hands and knees and stormed out of the room. Her heels hammered the corridor like gunshots as she speed-dialed her private lawyer. The precise moment the heavy door clicked shut, my secure line rang. Dr. Olivia Mercer's voice cut through the static from Walter Reed, delivering a breathtaking medical miracle. Commander Fraser, I have personally reviewed the file and requested the lab to urgently reanalyze the biopsy sample. The results are clear. You do not have pancreatic cancer. That abnormal area is just an acute infected pseudocyst due to complications. The condition is very dangerous but entirely treatable with drainage surgery and high-dose antibiotics. You will definitely live. She had single-handedly canceled my death sentence. The civilian hospital had botched the initial reading. The radiologist who reviewed my scans had misidentified the pseudocyst as a malignant mass, a mistake that would have killed me if I had accepted my mom's palliative care plan without question. 1,000 volts of electricity surged through my veins. I dragged my battered body into the adjoining bathroom, turning the faucet on full blast. I collapsed against the porcelain sink, drowning out my violent, heaving sobs of absolute relief beneath the sound of crashing water. My entire body shook. My knees gave out, and I gripped the cold porcelain with both hands, tears running freely down my face for the first time since my dad's funeral. The cold water splashed against my wrists and forearms, and I watched it swirl down the drain, carrying with it every ounce of grief I had been drowning in for 72 hours. But the tears dried incredibly fast, instantly replaced by freezing tactical clarity. I looked at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me was not a dying patient. She was a commander who had just received the most critical intelligence of her career. I could have walked out that door, told my mom the truth, and ended the nightmare right there. But then she would have simply regrouped, hired a different set of lawyers, and found another angle to bleed me dry. She would never stop. Parasites never do. I wiped my face with a rough paper towel, splashed cold water over my swollen eyes, walked back to the bed, and perfectly adjusted my breathing to mimic a rapidly dying woman. My family wanted me dead. The universe had given me a second chance. I was going to use it to let them hang themselves with their own greed. The covert operation to exterminate the traitors within my own family had officially commenced. If you have ever realized the people you trusted most were just waiting for you to fall, please take a second to hit the like button right now. Tell me down in the comments. How did you find the strength to fight back when your own family turned against you? Following a successful surgical drainage procedure, which I explicitly ordered the military surgical team to downplay to my family as mere end-of-life pain management, I was officially discharged. The military doctors played their roles flawlessly, handing my mom a grim-faced prognosis report, while secretly giving me a thumbs-up behind the curtain. The luxurious limousine ride back to the sprawling Fraser estate felt exactly like being transported in a hearse while fully awake. I kept my head slumped against the tinted window, my breathing deliberately shallow, while my mom sat across from me making phone calls to her financial advisor. The moment we crossed the marble threshold, my mom immediately dictated the terms of my isolation. I've prepared a room for you on the ground floor. Going up and down the stairs right now is too much. Nurse Brenda will take care of you here. She smiled warmly for the hired help, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She was intentionally severing my physical access to my upstairs office, the hidden wall safe containing my dad's classified documents, and my secured computer terminals. I offered a weak, compliant nod, carefully masking my razor-sharp awareness behind half-closed eyelids. Over the next few agonizing days, I faked deep drug-induced slumbers whenever anyone entered the room. I regulated my breathing to a slow, dying rhythm, keeping my eyes just barely cracked open to monitor their every move through the slit of the door. I memorized their schedules. My mom left the house every Tuesday and Thursday for her hair appointments. My sister slept until noon and spent the afternoons on video calls with friends, complaining loudly about how stressful it was to manage a dying relative. Nurse Brenda checked my vitals at 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 9 p.m., then retreated to the kitchen for coffee. Those gaps were my operational windows. My mom hosted a constant stream of her country club friends, giving tearful tours of the first-floor sick room and accepting casseroles and sympathy cards with an Oscar-worthy trembling lip. She even placed a donation jar on the hallway table for a fabricated medical fund, pocketing the cash contributions. I was effectively a prisoner of war in my own childhood home, entirely dependent on my military discipline to keep from breaking cover. Every night after the house went dark, I did controlled isometric exercises in my bed to keep my recovering body combat ready. I also began secretly recording audio on a small digital device Mateo had taped to the underside of my bedside table, capturing every incriminating conversation that drifted through my door. Early one morning, I disconnected my IV stand, ignoring the searing pain in my abdomen, and crept barefoot behind the living room archway. The cold marble tiles sent a sharp chill through my bare feet. My mom was barking aggressive orders into her phone to my CFO, pacing back and forth in front of the grand fireplace. Marcus Lexi's condition is very bad. I demand you prepare a valuation report for the entire Fraser Holdings Fund and transfer administrative power to me by early next week. She did not even lower her voice. She believed I was drugged unconscious in the next room. Immediately after she hung up, my sister's shrill voice echoed on a separate call with an elite car broker from the upstairs landing. Yes, the 1972 Corvette, original condition. I want it appraised and sold this week. No need to ask the old owner, she is no longer capable of speaking. She was already liquidating my dad's legacy before my body was cold. Absolute disgust curled my fist so tightly my surgical incision burned and a thin line of blood seeped through my bandage. I slipped silently out the side door, the cold evening air stinging my bare arms through the thin hospital gown. I met Mateo in the blind spot of the garden security cameras behind the old tool shed, the same shed where my dad used to store his fishing gear. Using standard military hand signals, we established a strict extraction protocol. I handed him a folded piece of paper containing highly secure login credentials and specific legal instructions written in my dad's old cipher, a substitution code the general had taught us both during long afternoons in the garage. Mateo studied them, memorized the sequence, then chewed and swallowed the paper. No evidence. From that moment forward, Mateo operated as my forward intelligence officer. He photographed every document that crossed my mom's desk. He recorded the license plates of every lawyer and financial advisor who visited the estate. He intercepted delivery receipts for appraisals my sister had ordered on my personal property. Every piece of intelligence was smuggled out of the estate in the false bottom of his gardening toolbox and delivered to Victoria Sterling at a secure drop location 12 miles from the property. My family blindly celebrated their incoming wealth inside the mansion, completely unaware that their golden cage had become a sniper's nest. The week dragged on in a suffocating atmosphere of sickening hypocrisy. My mom brought a priest to my bedside to administer last rites, while simultaneously emailing her interior designer about renovating my bedroom into a yoga studio. She had already called a real estate appraiser to quietly assess the market value of the estate, scheduling the walkthrough for the week after my expected death. My sister, meanwhile, had started boxing up my personal belongings from the upstairs bedroom, redistributing my jewelry and designer items into her own closet. Mateo reported every detail through the secure channel, under the perfect guise of a distant relative dropping by to pay her final respects. Victoria Sterling, my sharp, highly trained civil lawyer and former JAG officer, successfully bypassed my mom's surveillance net. She arrived carrying a funeral wreath and wearing a black veil, playing the part of a grieving second cousin from Virginia. She had spent 3 days rehearsing her cover story, studying our family tree, and memorizing the layout of the estate from blueprints Mateo had photographed. My mom ushered her in without a second glance, too focused on accepting condolences to question a familiar-sounding surname. The second my bedroom door locked shut, Victoria's polite morning demeanor vanished entirely. She dumped a massive pile of encrypted dossiers and legal ledgers onto my mattress. She had been working non-stop in the shadows, ruthlessly executing the financial directives Mateo had smuggled out of the estate over the past several days. Victoria stood at attention, opening the first heavy binder with military precision. "Commander, I have established a steel legal wall. Based on military law and civil law, I froze all personal accounts, freezing Evelyn's entire access to Fraser Holdings. Any transfer request from her will automatically be rejected by the system." Hearing the verbal confirmation felt like donning a suit of bulletproof armor. Every bank account, every brokerage, every holding company was now sealed behind an encrypted legal firewall that my mom's country club lawyers could never penetrate. My assets were completely locked down in an impenetrable holding pattern, utterly inaccessible to the greedy vultures roaming the halls just outside my door. I nodded sharply, taking the heavy fountain pen from her hand to deliver my final ruthless legal command. Set up a perpetual charitable trust named after General Arthur. Transfer all assets, shares, and control into it. Erase Evelyn and Harper's inheritance status. Don't leave them a single dime. Victoria did not flinch. She had seen this coming the moment she read the intelligence reports. She flipped to the flagged pages, pointing to each signature line with a steady finger. I signed the stack of documents with heavy, definitive strokes, each one a nail in the coffin of a relationship that should have been sacred but was instead a transaction. My hand paused for a fraction of a second over my sister's name on the disinheritance clause. I thought about the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then I thought about the woman who was currently upstairs trying to sell my dead dad's car out from under me. I pressed the pen down hard and signed. Victoria gathered the signed originals, slid them into a fireproof courier bag, and tucked it inside her funeral wreath. She would file the trust documents with the county clerk before the sun came up. There would be no second chances and absolutely no financial parachute for their treachery. That night, my mom crept into my dimly lit room, stroking my hair with a sickeningly fake, pious sorrow. Her perfume was heavy and cloying, the same scent that used to fill the house when she prepared for her society galas. "Lexi, I think we should invite Chaplain Brooks and your comrades over this Sunday. A small party, so everyone can see you one last time. For peace of mind." I knew exactly what she wanted. A grand, tragic stage to play the grieving mother in front of high society witnesses to solidify her upcoming financial reign. She needed the military community to see her devotion to testify later that she was a loving, attentive caretaker. I gave a weak, agreeable nod, a phantom smirk crossing my lips in the dark. I would gladly let her build the stage for her own execution. 3 days later, the mansion reeked overwhelmingly of white lilies and carefully staged mourning. My mom had hired a professional event planner to arrange the flowers, the seating, and the lighting. She had even printed memorial programs with my official Navy portrait on the front cover and a fabricated quote attributed to me about the importance of family unity on the back. High-ranking military officers, Navy chaplains, and elite corporate executives filled the grand living room, their voices hushed in deep respect for my impending death. The curtains were drawn to a dramatic half-close. Framed photographs of me in uniform had been strategically placed on every surface, each one surrounded by white candles. A string quartet played softly in the corner, a touch my mom had insisted on to elevate the atmosphere from somber to theatrical. Standing center stage, dabbing non-existent tears with a lace handkerchief, my mom delivered her masterpiece of a speech to the crowd. "Lexi is the pride of this family. She wants us to be strong. I know you want to hand the assets back to the family for me and Harper to protect, to maintain the legacy." She was brazenly planting the legal seeds of her hostile takeover right in front of witnesses, using my supposed dying wish as her absolute shield. My sister lingered near the champagne table, sipping expensive bubbles and whispering to a group of well-dressed executives about how she planned to restructure the family's assets once the estate was settled. Her designer heels clicked against the marble as she drifted from guest to guest, collecting condolences like poker chips. Neither of them shed a single genuine tear. Neither of them checked on me once behind that heavy oak door. The two of them orbited the room like vultures circling a carcass, feeding on the sympathy of the crowd, while I lay in my ground floor room fully dressed in my pristine navy dress blues, listening to every word through the wall. Right as my mom finished her sickening sentence, the heavy oak door of my ground floor room swung open violently. There was no wheelchair. There was no frail, dying woman. I marched out into the hallway wearing my pristine navy dress blues, my service medals gleaming fiercely under the crystal chandelier, my posture rigid and unyielding. Every ribbon, every pin, every insignia was in its exact regulation place. The entire crowded room went dead silent. 50 people stopped breathing at once. The champagne glass in my sister's hand slipped and shattered loudly on the marble floor, sending shards skidding across the polished stone. The blood drained entirely from my mom's face, leaving her looking like a ghost, standing beneath her own shrine of fake grief. I stopped dead center in the room, my eyes locked onto her with lethal precision. Thank you all for coming. But before we say our goodbyes, you need to hear what my family had to say. I slammed my digital audio recorder onto the mahogany coffee table and hit play. The cold, venomous recordings I had secretly captured over the past week echoed harshly off the mansion walls. Just 3 more days, I'll take her Corvette. Every whispered plot, every greedy phone call, every hissing hallway conversation filled the silent room. The military guests shot looks of absolute, unadulterated disgust at the 2 women. A retired admiral near the fireplace set his drink down and took a full step backward. My mom panicked violently, waving her arms and shrieking to the crowd. "She's crazy. The chemo made her delusional. Don't listen to her." Beside her, my sister stomped her foot, screeching in humiliating tone-deaf desperation. "That's my car. You promised it to me." They were completely unraveling in front of the city's elite. Every person in that room watched 2 women confirm their own guilt in real time. A Navy chaplain slowly removed his hand from my mom's shoulder, stepping away from her, as if she were contaminated. The lace handkerchief fell from my mom's fingers and landed silently on the marble. I reached into my uniform jacket, pulled out my official military medical file alongside the heavy trust documents, and slammed them down next to the recorder. The stack hit the table with the weight of a judge's gavel. "I do not have cancer, and I am perfectly sane enough to permanently lock all assets into an irrevocable trust. You have no right to take anything, not even a single dime." The guests immediately backed away, leaving the 2 traitors entirely isolated in the center of the vast room. My mom's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing, her entire body trembling. My sister stood frozen, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single coherent word. I pointed a rigid, unforgiving finger directly at the massive front doors. "Get out of General Fraser's house, right now." The brutal public execution of their social standing was complete. Neither of them moved, so I took 1 step forward and they both flinched. They grabbed their purses and stumbled toward the door, my sister's broken heel dragging against the marble. Not a single guest moved to help them. Greedy people never surrender quietly, especially when their gold mine is forcibly seized. Over the next few months, entirely unwilling to accept her new reality of poverty, my mom hired a team of sleazy civil lawyers on contingency. She officially filed a massive, sprawling lawsuit against me. Her fabricated narrative was utterly pathetic. She claimed Mateo had maliciously manipulated me in a moment of weakness, that my illness had made me totally paranoid, and that the trust documents should be voided due to mental incapacity. She submitted affidavits from her country club friends testifying to my supposed erratic behavior. She dug up old arguments between us and twisted them into evidence of my instability. She even tried to subpoena my military psychiatric records, a request that was shut down immediately by the Department of Defense. The ensuing legal battle was fiercely grueling and explicitly designed to break me mentally. I was forced to sit through extensive civilian medical boards and highly invasive psychological evaluations just to legally prove I owned my own mind. Strangers in white coats asked me to count backward, to recite the months in reverse to describe ink blots, while a court stenographer recorded every syllable. One psychiatrist asked me to explain why I felt compelled to disinherit my own mother, his tone dripping with implication. I answered with the same flat, factual calm I used during mission debriefings. My mom continuously leaked twisted sob story narratives to the press, trying her hardest to drag my officer's honor through the mud to force a financial settlement. She gave tearful television interviews to local news outlets, clutching a framed photograph of us from my commissioning ceremony, playing the heartbroken mother, abandoned by a mentally unstable, vengeful daughter. She hired a publicist who planted stories in 3 different regional newspapers, each one painting me as a paranoid, trauma-damaged officer who had turned on her loving family under the influence of a manipulative servant. Anonymous letters arrived at my base commander's office questioning my fitness for duty. Victoria traced them back to my mom's legal team. It was incredibly exhausting, but my military discipline kept my spine straight. I refused to yield a single inch to terrorists, especially domestic ones. When we finally went to trial, my legal ambush was perfectly executed. Dr. Mercer took the stand, providing irrefutable time-stamped military medical records, proving my absolute cognitive clarity before, during, and after my surgery. She systematically dismantled the opposing counsel's narrative, presenting brain imaging blood panels and a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation conducted at Walter Reed that certified me as fully competent. The civilian radiologist who had botched my original diagnosis was called as a witness and forced to admit his error under oath. Following her, Victoria Sterling systematically laid out the steel-clad trust documents, proving there were zero legal loopholes to exploit. She walked the jury through every signature, every notarization, every timestamp. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, my hands folded, my uniform pressed, watching my mom's highly paid lawyers desperately and unsuccessfully try to punch holes in a solid concrete wall. At the final ruling, my mom looked incredibly haggard, completely stripped of her wealthy high society glow. Her designer clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds from the stress of public exposure. Her hair, usually salon perfect, was streaked with gray she no longer bothered to cover. When the judge brought down the heavy wooden gavel dismissing her case entirely and permanently cementing the irrevocable trust, she looked at me from across the aisle. She weakly whispered something about a mother's unconditional love. I stared back at the woman who had eagerly counted down the minutes to my death, offered a look of absolute freezing disgust, and walked out of the courtroom without uttering a single word. My heels echoed against the courthouse marble. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the daylight and did not look back. By the following spring, the massive gardens of the Fraser estate were blooming with new life. Mateo had planted a row of red and white roses along the front path, my dad's favorite combination. My sister, completely cut off and drowning in credit card debt, continuously bombarded my phone with pathetic begging text messages demanding a financial bailout. The messages started with fury, accusing me of ruining her life. Then they shifted to guilt, reminding me of a childhood birthday party where she had shared her cake with me. Then they collapsed into raw, desperate begging, promising to change, promising to get a job, promising anything. I read her cowardly words with a cold, detached smirk. I did not reply to a single one. I simply hit the block button, permanently deleting her from my life and my devices. The heavy door to my bank account and my heart was bolted shut forever. Loyalty earned its weight in gold. I called Mateo into my dad's old mahogany study and sat him down across the general's desk, the same desk where my dad used to plan military operations. Mateo sat stiffly in the leather chair, his work boots leaving faint traces of garden soil on the Persian rug. He looked uncomfortable in the formal setting, the same way he had looked uncomfortable every time my dad had called him in to share a glass of bourbon after a long day in the yard. I slid the transfer documents across the polished wood. I transferred a massive block of non-voting shares from a subsidiary company to Mateo Vargas, pairing it with a premium executive retirement package that included full medical coverage for his wife and grandchildren. I secured a life of absolute luxury and safety for him and his family. The man who had risked everything, his job, his home on the estate, his reputation for the general's daughter, would never worry about money for as long as he lived. His calloused hands shook as he held the documents. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He pressed his fist against his mouth, looked up at my dad's portrait on the wall, and gave a single tight nod. That was enough. As for the 1972 Corvette, the epicenter of my sister's greed and the ultimate symbol of my mom's betrayal, I watched it loaded onto a flatbed truck on a cool Tuesday morning. The hauler secured the tie-down straps over the dark blue hood, the same hood I had helped my dad sand and repaint when I was 14 years old. I sent it directly to a high-end auction block, turning their coveted prize into liquidated cash. The car that my dad and I built together with our bare hands deserved a better legacy than being a pawn in their schemes. The massive influx of funds from the car auction seeded the General Arthur Fraser Military Scholarship, a foundation fully dedicated to supporting the children of fallen soldiers. Kids who lost their parents to war would never have to beg for tuition the way I had to beg for my own mother's love. Standing in my dad's old mahogany study, fully recovered from my illness and back in uniform, I carefully adjusted my medals in the reflection of his glass-framed portrait. I threw a crisp, perfect salute to his painted face on the wall. He was right all along. True strength lies in discipline and honor, not in toxic bloodlines. The trust he placed in me, sealed in legal ink and forged in that garage over a rusted Corvette, had outlasted every scheme, every lie, and every betrayal his widow and youngest daughter could throw at it. I stepped out onto the front porch, breathing in the fresh morning air alongside Mateo. He handed me a thermos of black coffee the same way he used to hand my dad one, before every early morning inspection of the grounds. We stood there in comfortable silence for a long moment, looking out across the gardens he had spent decades tending. The rose bushes were thick with new blooms. The gravel path my dad used to walk every evening was freshly raked. Mateo had kept this place alive when no one else in the family bothered to care. I extended my hand. He took it, his grip firm and steady, the grip of a man who had earned his place at my side through years of unwavering loyalty that my own flesh and blood could never match. The brutal war for my life and legacy was finally over. My mom was bankrupt, stripped of her social standing and living in a one-bedroom rental on the outskirts of town. My sister had moved in with a boyfriend who would drop her the moment her credit ran dry. Neither of them would ever set foot in this house again. Sometimes the comrades you choose matter infinitely more than the family you were unfortunately born into. I grabbed my heavy navy duffel bag, squared my shoulders, and headed back to the fleet, unbroken, victorious, and completely free. If you agree that toxic family members deserve to face the harsh consequences of their actions, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. What was the defining moment that made you finally cut ties with toxic relatives forever?